Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This is the second part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy. I'm a huge fan of the Final Fantasy series, and I love Final Fantasy VII as well. I really like some of the supplemental material that Final Fantasy VII has, like Crisis Core. I've dabbled a little bit in Dirge of Cerberus as well, and I even really liked the Advent Children movie. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth came out about 5 months ago now, and I finally got around to finishing the game. So with all of that said, this is going to be kind of a free-form thought, just talking about my experience with this game and my overall thoughts on this video game and kind of what I'm hoping to see moving forward. But yeah, with all of that said, let's talk about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So like I just mentioned, this is going to be a freeform thought video. I don't have anything scripted out, so a lot of the cuts that you're going to see are going to be moments where I'm just trying to figure out what I want to say about the game or removing dead air and things like that. But for the most part, this is going to be just off the dome thoughts about the game because I just finished the game yesterday. I finished it at exactly 100 hours, and I have a lot to say about this game, especially in regards to the playtime that I had with the game, and I don't really know how to structure a type of video like this because I think there are many things that I thought were great, wonderful, beautiful about the game. There are definitely some parts that I am mixed on, and there's definitely a lot that I didn't really click with. I didn't mesh well with the game in many aspects. So yeah, before I really get into all of the nitty-gritty on the details of the game, my general experience with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth are positive. I enjoyed this game a lot, and I recommend that a lot of people who have not played Final Fantasy VII Remake go into that game so that you can get to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because I think that this game is in many ways a huge step up in terms of quality, content, gameplay. I've been thinking so much about the future of Final Fantasy and kind of what modern Final Fantasy has felt like so far and where it kind of feels like it's going. So back in 2020, we got the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it was very linear, to say the least. It was a 40-hour-long game covering the first 3 or 5 hours of the original Final Fantasy VII. So whenever people started speculating and theorizing what was all gonna happen, how are we going to get through the rest of this game without there being 10 entries? You know, how are they going to cram the rest of Disc 1? Like, what are they going to do for the next game? And I think a lot of people, I think, are pretty pleased with how they have decided to put the rest of the Disc 1 portion of Final Fantasy VII into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. But after we had Final Fantasy Remake, the next big game we got was Final Fantasy XVI, which was, you know, it still is, at the time of me recording this, the most recent mainline entry in the game. So we don't know whenever 17 is coming out, we don't know who's directing it, what kind of gameplay style it's going to go for, but 16 is the most recent mainline series game, and not even a whole year has gone by since 16 until we finally got Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So within a year's time, we got 2 huge projects. So with Final Fantasy VII Remake being so linear and Final Fantasy XVI being really linear as well, I think a lot of people were a little worried going into what Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was going to feel like. Needless to say, based on the trajectory that the series had at that point in time after 16, I think a lot of people's expectations were fully blown out of the water because this game is very open world. When it comes to the very linear Final Fantasy games like 13 or 16 or 7 Remake, I think people have kind of had a lot of complaints about that style of game, and I think whenever we jump to games like Final Fantasy 15 as well, I think people look at the open world style of that game and have a lot of complaints about that as well. So a lot of the challenge, I think, for Square Enix as a company has been, okay, well, people don't really like the incredibly linear storytelling and not a ton of exploration. And then whenever we have something that's super open world like 15, you know, there's issues that come with that as well, and especially with turn-based action versus action-based action. I think whenever Final Fantasy VII Remake came out, we had a lot of people looking at the gameplay there and feeling like, okay, I think this is actually a really well done evolution of the turn-based action style and blending in that hack and slash, you know, action RPG style of gameplay with it. You know, pausing the game to go through your menu, select characters who you want to do combat as and stuff like that. 7 Remake introduced that, and I think they did really, really well. And even once we got the PlayStation 5 Intergrade version, we kind of got this synergy system introduced to the gameplay, and I think because the Intergrade Yuffie mission was such a small package, I think people were really hyped to see, okay, how are we going to do this moving forward with all of the many characters who we're going to play as in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And yeah, you look at the action combat slash, you know, strategy-based combat in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Honestly, if we're talking about just the good things about this game, I think the combat, just the actual fighting in this game is so fun. It's very addictive, and honestly, I've personally felt that there is a lot more strategy that goes into the combat of Rebirth as opposed to Remake. I feel like a lot of the combat in Remake was pretty straightforward. Sure, you had to execute certain abilities to stagger enemies or exploit enemy weaknesses and things like that. There was some strategy in the game. But I felt like in Rebirth, you can't really just mash a button to win. I found myself in many situations where I would just go straight towards an enemy, not even considering what their attack pattern might be like or what things I have to do, how I need to dodge, how I need to stagger the enemy, how I need to parry an attack, so to say. And I found myself really just feeling like there was a ton of strategy in the combat itself in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and it was pretty refreshing. It kind of felt like, oh, okay, so this is how we start really implementing that strategic side of the action-based combat in these games. Using the synergy system to use these all-out attacks on enemies is really fun, and they're really flashy, and you can develop different types of synergy attacks depending on what character you're using that ability with. And I just felt like there was just so much customization, especially whenever we start talking about things like the ability level up system. As you're fighting the enemies in the game, you gain experience like, you know, just leveling up your character that boosts their stats and their magic and their strength and their HP, all that sort of stuff. But in the menu, you also have the option to open up what kind of feels like a sphere grid or a crystarium kind of screen, or whatever the level up ability system was like in Final Fantasy 15, where once you have gained enough ability points or AP in the game, you can open up that menu system, and going through all of your characters, depending on how much AP you have, you can spend that AP on getting new abilities, unlocking new spells, giving them more magic or attack power, you know, unlocking new synergy abilities with specific characters, and even towards the end of their level up system, unlocking their ultimate limit form in their grid. There was also the ability to just fully reset everything, so if you found yourself kind of in a tough spot and you wanted to have a very specific ability, but you had just spent all of your AP on other abilities and you didn't have enough at that point in time to give yourself, let's say, that big bad limit break at the end of their ability tree, you could just reset everything and organize all of your ability points that line up in a way that just points you directly to the ability that you want to unlock. And so a lot of customization like that was incredibly welcome. And then on top of just all of the other ways that you can customize your character's abilities and their just all of their many spells and things like that, of course Materia is playing a huge role in all of these remake games and all of the Final Fantasy games. Materia is a huge piece of its story, but also a huge piece of its gameplay, which was kind of one of those things that people really loved about the original Final Fantasy VII. Similar with Espers and Final Fantasy VI. Yes, they were a big plot device, but they were also a big gameplay device as well. That's kind of how materia is. So I think I just am always going to love that. So equipping materia in these games, finding pieces of gear or weapons that have more materia slots, or connecting materia slots to put all of your materia in there and just really customize your character to be basically any kind of class that you want based on what materia and how you evolve their ability tree in the game. You can really make any character run however you want them. If you want Barrett to be your white mage, you can do that, you know? Like if you want Tifa to be, you know, I mean, she's a monk in the game, but if you want to equip her to be your white or black mage or something like that, you can absolutely do that. But on the gameplay as well, just in regards to everything outside of just the run-of-the-mill combat that you're going to be experiencing in the game, whether it be through just enemies or boss battles and things like that, there are so many mini games. Everyone has already talked ad nauseum about how much side content there is to do in the game, specifically in the way of mini games. And yes, there's really not a whole lot else that I really want to dive into, because I just feel like this is kind of a broken record thing about this game. But obviously, if I'm talking about it here, I can't just skip over the fact that there are so many mini games. So whenever you go to places like the Gold Saucer, or even just in little towns that you visit, you will find yourself doing tons of little side stuff, like little mini games and things like that, whether it be racing chocobos or doing things like rhythm tapping the right button at the right time type of mini games for scripted events and stuff like that. There are just so many little bits of gameplay mechanics in this game that are not connected to the main line of combat in any way. For many people, that's incredibly exciting. Just having this really long game to be playing and switching up the way that you go about playing it in many different ways. I think a lot of people are going to be attracted to that. But in my case, I found myself to be quite burnt out by a lot of it. Once I got to the Gold Saucer, that's kind of where I really started taking a break, because there was just so much to do. There was just so many side quests, there were so many mini games, and as someone who kind of feels like a completionist in many of the games that I play, it's really hard for me to continue going to the next story before I max out everything that I'm able to do in a given area, which was part of the reason why it took me 100 hours just to finish the main story, because I did so much side content. And if there weren't things that unlocked after you finished the game, I would have probably spent 150 hours trying to do everything that I possibly can in this game before I actually let the credits roll. But there's still more stuff to be playing in this game after the credits roll as well. So it's just a little bit of a tangent there, but there's just so much to do here. And kind of just to talk about that a little bit as well, I kind of already just spoke on this just for a minute. As I just progressed through the story, in between each main scenario, there is just a ton that can be crammed in the middle of those spaces, whether they be filler things or they be mini games or side quests or things like that, just little extra bosses that you can go fight for, you know, rare items, or exploring all of the areas in these very large open spaces, using the chocobo to find new buried things under the ground, and using the item transmuter thing to create new stuff. There is just so much to do in between main story quests. So personally, as a game who loves playing games for their story, I found a lot of side story stuff to be very compelling, especially whenever you get into stuff like Queen's Blood, the card game. There's lots of cool side story stuff. But as soon as I personally started taking, I guess, a different path that wasn't on, you know, the mainline story path, every single time that I decided to diverge that, it took me a really long time to get back to the main story. I'm just kind of rambling about this, it feels like, but if you kind of get what I'm kind of getting to, the pacing of all of the main story stuff was so hard to get through, because there was just so much what I felt to be compelling side stuff in between the main stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, there would be stretches of time where I would go anywhere between like 6 and 10 hours of playing the game before I actually saw the next mainline story cutscene. So the pacing of its story for me personally was all over the place. And part of the reason why it took me so long to finally get to the end of this game and finish it and get to making a review like this was because there was just a point in time where I just found myself playing this game and not progressing its story at all, and just doing a lot of the side content. And I just started to feel like the game was going nowhere because I was just doing all of the side stuff that you can do. So take a game like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I loved Breath of the Wild and probably put in about 150 hours into that game as well. I finished the story and then continued to play the game for many, many hours afterwards, and I just thought that it was a very compelling game. But at the very start of the game, I remember feeling very overwhelmed at what there was to do after, you know, the Great Plateau area of the game. So whenever I got around to playing The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, I felt that sense of dread of how much there was to explore, and just kind of had this feeling of, I just did all of this exploring in the previous game, and I know that there's a lot of new stuff and much of the map is very different, but I actually never ended up finishing Tears of the Kingdom because I just felt so overwhelmed by how much there was to do. And when it came to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I started to feel like that again. There was just so much to do. I had been playing the game for like 60 hours, and then I finally got to Gongaga. And I was like, how much more of this game is there? And then you get to Cosmo Canyon, and there was just a point in time where, in order for me to convince myself that it was even possible for me to finish the game, I had to basically put a hard stop on doing any of the side content, because I honestly found myself it just felt like a slog. It just felt like there's so much to do, and I'm not actually progressing the game. It feels like I'm leveling up my characters a lot, I'm getting lots of new items, I'm exploring new areas. I think it's all really nifty, right? It's all really cool. I like seeing all of this stuff. I like playing the game, but I just felt that type of burnout that you get whenever you just feel like there is just so much to do and you're not progressing the story. So in order for me to actually start finishing the game, I had to just say, okay, I'm done with side content. I have to stop. I have to stop doing the side content stuff. And then I kind of had that feeling of like, oh, but there is so much cool side content to do. Okay, I'll at least do the card system. I'll play Queen's Blood and things like that. Or okay, I'll at least go, if it's something that I know is going to give me an item, I'll do that. But I'm not doing any more of Chadley's nonsense. I'm not doing any more of the Chocobo treasure hunt stuff. I just had to put a stop on a lot of that stuff, because I just had to finish the game. And there was just so much of the game that I had played. And really, playing a game like this, with just how much content there is, I know that there are tons of people who look at a game like this and they're like, great, I never have to buy another game again because there's so much stuff to do here in this game. And if that's you, that's awesome that you can just be satisfied with a game like this. But I love to play video games, and I love to play many different types of video games. And when I play one specific type of game for too long, I do start to feel that burnout, and I start to get that feeling of, is this really what I want to do? Like, do I want to keep on playing this game? And when I played Final Fantasy XVI, that game finished at about 80 hours, but it was so linear. Sure, there was some side content to do, and I liked a lot of the story that the side content was providing in that game, but I was able to push through Final Fantasy XVI because there was just always that forward-moving momentum in its story. Whereas whenever you have so much player agency in a game like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, there is just so much to do. And I could get so easily distracted from the main story so many times. And like I said, guys, this is really just freeform rambling here, so I'm sorry if this is like just scatterbrained all over the place and if I'm repeating a bunch of stuff that I've already said. But I don't know how else to say it other than there was just too much content in this game for me to handle. My wife was even asking me like, oh, have you not finished this game yet? Like, you've been playing this for like 60 hours. Like, what's going on? Like, how long is this game? I'm like, I don't even think I'm halfway through the game yet. And I'm like, 40 hours into the game or something like that. And for me personally, playing a game for 40 hours and not even being done with the story that's a long game. That's a really long game. And I know that there are games like the Persona series where even just going through the main story alone for Persona 5 is like 100 hours, like 90 to 100 hours, depending on, Royal Edition or something, maybe even more. But then you have a game like this where it's just so much stuff to do. And then even when you're done with the story, there's still more stuff to do, and on paper, that's awesome. More people should be making games like that, and with the budget that this game had, it's like, yeah, I'm sure, like, it's good that they put so much stuff to do in this game because, it's clearly an expensive game. But I finished this game at 100 hours, and just to finish the story of a game and to be spending that long, like I said, my overall experience with this game was, for the most part, really positive. But I just can't express to you how glad I am to finally be done with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because 100 hours for me, who works 3 different jobs outside of recording these videos, and I have 2 little girls and a third baby on the way, 100 hours to play a game like this, I just don't know how sustainable that is for me in my life. That's just so much time to put into one game that is a single player story driven game. But with all of that rant out of the way, I'll talk a little bit about the story here. And just in regards to what I was saying too about Final Fantasy VII Remake and it being a 40-hour long game that just encompasses the first like 3 or 5 hours of the original PlayStation 1 game. This game, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, covers a lot more of the original game in comparison to Remake. And it's basically going all the way up to the end of Disc 1, which, there's so much there. There is so much to cover there. And thinking that it was going to be exactly like how Rebirth was, where it's like, oh my gosh, we're going to spend, 40 hours in each town that we're going to. Honestly, based on how I played the game, you probably could spend 40 hours in each town that you go to or each region of the map that you go to, because there's just so much here. There's so much here in the game. But for the amount of story that they put into this game and the amount of content that there was here, I actually really enjoyed the way that, for the most part, these regions were broken up and how they were designed as far as like their open areas and things like that, and the type of side content and main story content in each like zone that you're in, right? And then just as you're continuing to progress through the game and you're getting new modes of transportation and things like that, I felt like just connecting the rest of this entire first disc of the game was very, very well done. And I'm incredibly excited to see where the third part or the finale of this remake trilogy is going to take Disc 2 and Disc 3. But there have been multiple points, and I felt this way too about Final Fantasy VII Remake, where I'm not necessarily frustrated or sour about the narrative of this remake trilogy as it is compared to the original Final Fantasy VII, but I just have those questions of like, why are they deciding to tell the story this way? Being a Kingdom Hearts fan, I know that Tetsuya Nomura has a knack for setting up mysteries and having very intriguing payoffs of questions, and even in paying off questions, he just continues to raise more questions. And I feel like the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy up to this point has still just basically done nothing but make me ask more questions and ask more questions. I do feel though that there is a lot about this game that is incredibly faithful to the original game, which I appreciate. And I also really, really appreciate a lot of its the liberties that it takes in creating new story scenarios. Like, for instance, when you do go to the Gold Saucer and there is the entire play reenactment scenario and just like the whole date mechanic and all that sort of stuff, the way that they have decided to take that original scenario from the game and really do its own thing with it, I love it. It's like the very first bombing mission part of Final Fantasy VII Remake, where you're like, wow, they are going all out with recreating this original game. And there were so many moments where I felt that, and it was wonderful. But there were also definitely many moments where I was just wondering, like, I wonder why they are deciding to go about remaking the game in this way instead of doing it how they originally did it over here. For instance, just gaining Yuffie as a party member, I thought that was a very quirky way in the original story, where she basically just you run into her out in the open world of the game. Yuffie is an optional character in Final Fantasy VII, the original game, but she's basically from the start of Rebirth a mainstay party member. You don't have a choice about that. The introduction that Rebirth gives to Cid is definitely very different with Rocket Town in the original Final Fantasy VII. And I'm not going to get into too many spoilers, but things like that, and especially something like the ending of this game and some of the going back and forth with Cloud and Zack and things like that, I felt like I'm not necessarily opposed to this, and I'm curious to see where it goes, but I'm just wondering, why did they decide to do this? And obviously, I don't even mean that in a snarky way. I'm just wondering kind of how this is all going to end and how it's all going to tie together, and are fans of the original going to eventually look back at the whole trilogy and think, yeah, that was wonderful, or are they going to look back at it and be like, how could they do this to my baby? But also, just another thing that is popping into my head is the amount of filler. And I know I talked about just all of the side things that you can do while you're out playing the game, but even in main story missions, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Remake have a lot of similar issues with filler. Just little gameplay mechanics like having to move that big Mako machine around and like having to throw boxes as Kate Sith in, just like little situations like that, or even climbing up sides of mountains and things like that just to get to new areas. I just felt like there were so many moments where I was just like, why couldn't we handle this with a little cutscene, or just, I don't know, do a different gameplay thing? A lot of it just felt like filler, and I was just wasting my time sitting there holding the directional button for a really long time, or I don't know, just doing little gameplay mini games in order to progress the story. That all felt like filler. This doesn't need to be here. Come on, what are we doing? But yeah, overall, I did really, really love Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. There was so much here, and if I just had more time on my plate to play games like this on a regular basis, I absolutely would. I think that as far as AAA video game standards go, I think that this is way up there as far as just the amount of content and the amount of just stuff that the developers are giving to you for the price that you're paying. We're at a point now where AAA games at minimum are costing $70. Sometimes you can find them for cheap at around $60, but oftentimes you're paying $70 for a game like this. Sometimes you're paying up to $100 depending on the edition that you're paying for, like the pre-order bonuses and things like that. So having a game like this, where for me personally, I played it for 100 hours and finally finished the story, and there's still so much that I have not done. And once you finish the game, you have the whole trophy and achievement journal thing that you have, where you can go back to different chapters and unlock different stuff and see cutscenes in a different way, or find new items and finish out stuff with new cards and things like that in the Queen's Blood minigame. There's so much to do after the game, and just knowing that I can go back now that I finished the story and continue playing and find more stuff and find more story content. There is just so much here that it's who am I to really complain about having too much content? So I wish I said that towards the beginning of this review, who am I to complain about too much content? Because that really is kind of my biggest beef with a game like this, is there is just so much here. I'm okay with paying $60 for a game that's only going to last me 30 hours, or maybe even less than that. The God of War games are usually somewhere between 20 and 30 hours long. Who am I to really complain about just having more and more content? But as I get older, and this is just my review, obviously if this is something that is all up your alley, awesome. I buy this game twice, buy it on Steam whenever it eventually comes out. But man, as I get older, I just don't know how much time I can spend just doing one video game, especially if I'm trying to build up a platform here on YouTube, which thank you everyone who has stuck around and liked the videos and subscribed and all that sort of stuff. I love getting to read all of your comments, and I try to be as engaging with you guys as I possibly can. So as I'm just like a smaller guy here on this platform, I'm trying to build this channel into something. So whenever something like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes out, and it is prime for my channel, and it's something that I am incredibly excited to play, it becomes a little stressful whenever I end up having to spend 100 hours over the course of 5 months, you know, just playing through that and almost nothing else. I played Animal Well whenever it came out in the midst of me playing this, and that was kind of in that stint of time that I was feeling burnt out by Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So playing Animal Well was a really nice change of pace. So I want to start doing that more. Not to say that I'll never play a 100-hour JRPG ever again, but it's going to be a long time before I do play a huge behemoth of a game like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And I was really looking forward to starting something like Persona 5 actually pretty recently. But after I finished this game, I think I just want to focus on playing some shorter games. And there are definitely some shorter JRPGs, like Chrono Trigger is one of my favorite games ever, and it's like 25 hours long at most. You know, there are definitely some shorter games that I do want to play and I want to talk about on the channel. But for now, I've played so much Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I loved it. I didn't like some of it, but for the most part, I did really like this game. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm just honestly very relieved to finally be done with this game. So my buddy DJ actually also made a review of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth a few months back. Definitely go check out that video. I will leave a link in the description below. If you like the more comedic review type stuff when it comes to video games, like kind of that JonTron or Scott the Woz type videos. My buddy DJ, also known as Mushroom Man, has done a very good job at doing that with not only anime but also video games as well. So I'll leave a link to both of his channels down there, his anime channel and his video game channel. So definitely go check him out. I love his review of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. He nails it on the head for a lot of it. I helped him film some of it as well, so it's kind of like a little bit of a plug for me as well, because I love his channel and I love everything that he's doing in regards to making content about like One Piece or about Final Fantasy or Disgaea or Tekken, things like that. So just leaving some love from my boy DJ. So go ahead and check him out down in the description. And while you're also in the description, go ahead and join my Discord. We've got other people there in the Discord community who love story-driven games, Final Fantasy, RPGs, all that sort of stuff. So if you're like that, if you're one of these like-minded people like us, go ahead and join in the description below. We'd love to see you in the Discord. And while you're down there, go ahead and hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell as well, so that you're notified whenever new videos like this go up. This felt like a big rambly mess, so I'm sorry if it wasn't like super cohesive or very helpful for you guys if you're trying to figure out if you want to play this game or not. But maybe you've already played the game or this was helpful. But just let me know down in the comments below what your experience is with Final Fantasy VII or just the Final Fantasy series as a whole. Have you played Rebirth? Have you put in 200 hours? Have you only played it for 40 hours? You know, let me know kind of where you're at in the game. I love getting to read what you guys have to say about the video games that I'm talking about here on the channel. So let me know what your history is with the Final Fantasy franchise. I am incredibly excited to read all that sort of stuff. So with all of that said, thank you guys for listening to my long ramble here about the series or about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in particular. So with all of that said, I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.